The Galactic Coalition had gathered at Station Meridian for the annual joint military exercises. Ships from 12 different alien species filled the massive docking bays. Each vessel was a proud display of its civilization's best engineering. The cruisers were beautiful machines with smooth curves and powerful plasma engine that could cross entire star systems in just a few hours. The Ali destroyers were even more impressive with their drives that could bend the fabric of space itself. Every ship in the fleet was fast and elegant, and designed to inspire fear in any enemy. And then there was the human vessel. Commander Daniel Hayes stood alone on the observation deck of the USS Fortitude. He watched through the large viewport as crews from other species pointed at his ship and laughed openly. The Fortitude was a heavy dreadnought-class warship, and it looked nothing like the sleek vessels around it. Where other ships had graceful lines, the Fortitude was blocky and rough. Where other ships moved like dancers through space, the Fortitude crawled like a tired old beast. The ambassador had called it an embarrassment to the coalition during a public speech just 2 days ago. Daniel did not react to any of this. He simply watched and waited. Lieutenant Morgan walked up to join him at the viewport. She was the ship's tactical officer, and she carried a tablet in her hands. Was young, but she was one of the sharpest officers Daniel had ever served with. Her eyes were hard as she looked at the alien crews mocking their vessel. "Sir, the Ali fleet commander has sent another message. He wants us to move to the rear of the formation. He says our speed is too slow and we are holding up the exercises." Daniel kept his eyes on the viewport. "Tell him we will take our assigned position." "I already did, sir." He laughed at me. Daniel nodded slowly. He had expected nothing less. The Fortitude had taken 3 weeks to reach Station Meridian. Most ships in the coalition made the same journey in 4 days. The galactic news networks had run story after story about humanity's embarrassing contribution to the fleet. Some reporters questioned whether humans even belonged in interstellar affairs. Others made jokes about the slow ship and its stubborn crew. None of them understood the truth. Speed had never been the point of the Fortitude. Before leaving Earth, Daniel had received his orders directly from Admiral Cole. She was a stern woman in her 60s with gray hair cut short and eyes that had witnessed 2 interstellar wars. She had built her career on difficult decisions, and she never wasted words. "The other species are going to mock you," she had told Daniel in her office. "Let them laugh. The Fortitude was not built to impress anyone. It was built to survive what other ships cannot." Those words stayed with Daniel as he watched the alien crews point and snicker at his vessel. Down in the engineering section of the Fortitude, Chief Engineer Brooks ran his calloused hand along the main reactor housing. Was a big man with graying hair and hands that had fixed more engines than most people had ever seen. He knew this ship better than anyone alive. The Fortitude ran on a triple redundant fusion core. This meant 3 separate reactors, each one powerful enough to run the entire ship on its own. If one failed, the second would take over. If 2 failed, the third would keep them alive. No other ship in the coalition had such a system because no other species thought it was necessary. The hull of the Fortitude was 17 meters thick. It was made of layered titanium carbide composite, a material so dense that it could stop almost any weapon known to galactic science. The ship also carried enough ammunition and supplies for 18 months of continuous combat operations. It could fight alone, far from any support, for longer than most wars lasted. The Fortitude was not really a warship in the traditional sense. It was a fortress that happened to move through space. That evening, the coalition held a tactical briefing in the main conference hall of Station Meridian. Officers from every species gathered around a massive holographic display that showed the planned exercises. Daniel took his seat in the back of the room where humans had been assigned. Fleet Commander X of the Ali ran the meeting. He was a tall creature with 4 arms and a clicking voice that his translator turned into flat English. He outlined the exercise parameters with obvious pride in his own fleet. "We will conduct mock battles against drone targets," X announced. "Ships will be graded on speed, accuracy, and tactical flexibility." He paused and turned his compound eyes toward Daniel. "The human vessel will observe from the rear of the formation. Your speed limitations make participation impractical." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled officers. Several commanders made sounds that their translators rendered as laughter. Daniel simply nodded, "Understood, Fleet Commander." The meeting continued, but Daniel barely listened. He had heard everything he needed to hear. These officers saw only what was on the surface. They saw a slow ship and assumed it was a weak ship. They did not understand that humanity had built something different on purpose. After the briefing ended, Morgan caught up with Daniel in the corridor. She had served under him for 3 years and she knew him better than most. "Sir, permission to speak freely." "Always, Lieutenant." Glanced around to make sure no aliens were nearby. "They are treating us like a joke. Every officer in that room was laughing at us. Does it not bother you at all?" Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her. His expression was calm, but his eyes held something she had not seen before. It was not anger or embarrassment. It was patience. The patience of someone who knew something that others did not. "Lieutenant, the build ships that can cross star systems in hours. The Ali build ships that can bend space itself. Both species have been traveling among the stars for thousands of years longer than humanity." "Yes, sir, that is exactly my point." Daniel smiled slightly. "And yet in all that time, they have never asked themselves one simple question. What happens when speed is not enough? What happens when you cannot run away?" Frowned. "I do not understand, sir." "You will, Lieutenant. When the time comes, you will understand exactly why the Fortitude was built the way it was." He turned and walked toward the lift that would take him back to the ship. Watched him go with confusion on her face. She trusted her commander, but she could not shake the feeling that he was preparing for something. Something that no one else at Station Meridian could see coming. In his quarters that night, Daniel looked out at the stars and thought about the road ahead. The Coalition saw humanity as newcomers who did not belong. They saw the Fortitude as proof that humans could not compete with older and wiser species. They were wrong, and soon, very soon, they would learn just how wrong they had been. The slow human warship sat quietly in its docking bay. It looked old and ugly and harmless, but deep within its armored hull, weapons waited in silence. Reactors hummed with restrained power, and a crew of 800 humans prepared for whatever the universe might throw at them. They did not know what was coming, but they were ready. The military exercises went exactly as expected for the first 2 days. The fast ships of the Coalition raced through simulated combat scenarios with impressive skill. Cruisers darted between targets like silver fish in dark water. Ali destroyers performed complex maneuvers that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Every successful run brought cheers from the crews and praise from the fleet commanders. The Fortitude watched it all from the rear of the formation. The human ship moved slowly along its assigned patrol route, while alien vessels zoomed past on either side. Some pilots made a game of flying dangerously close to the human vessel, just to show how fast they could go compared to the slow dreadnought. Commander Daniel Hayes ordered his crew to ignore the taunts. There was no point in getting angry at children who did not know any better. On the 3rd day of exercises, everything changed forever. Sensor Officer Martinez was the first to notice something strange. He was a quiet man with dark hair and sharp eyes that never seemed to miss anything on his screens. He had been watching the edge of the system as part of standard protocol when his display lit up with warnings. "Commander, I am picking up unusual readings at the outer boundary of the system. Multiple contacts approaching at bearing 275. Daniel moved quickly to the sensor station. "Can you identify them?" Worked his controls with growing concern on his face. The color drained from his skin as the data became clearer. "Sir, these signatures do not match anything in our database. I am counting hundreds of contacts, maybe thousands." The news spread across the coalition fleet within minutes. The exercise formations broke apart as ship captains demanded answers from their commanders. No one had expected real contacts. No one had prepared for an actual threat. Then the first visual images arrived, and fear replaced confusion. The approaching vessels were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were organic, made of twisted masses of chitin and biological matter that pulsed with a sickly inner glow. They moved in swarms like insects crossing the void of space, and they were heading directly toward Station Meridian at speeds that should have been impossible. Fleet Commander X broadcast orders across all channels. His clicking voice was tight with sudden fear. "All ships, form defensive positions immediately. We must protect the station at all costs." The coalition responded with the speed and precision they had practiced for so long. Cruisers surged forward with their plasma cannons charging bright. Ali destroyers spread into attack formations with their weapons humming. In seconds, the fastest ships in the fleet had engaged the enemy. The battle lasted 12 minutes. Daniel watched in horror from the bridge of the Fortitude as the coalition fleet was torn apart. The swarm creatures absorbed plasma bolts like water soaking into sand. Energy weapons that could destroy asteroids seemed to do nothing against hulls that regenerated almost instantly. The flagship, a beautiful vessel that had won countless battles, was swarmed by dozens of smaller creatures and ripped into pieces within moments. The Ali destroyers tried to retreat, but the enemy was faster. They were always faster. Ships that had mocked the Fortitude for being slow now died screaming as they tried to outrun creatures that could not be outrun. Martinez called out the losses with a hollow voice. "Coalition forces at 60% strength, 70% losses, 80%. Lieutenant Morgan gripped her console so hard her knuckles turned white. "Sir, the swarm is heading for the station. There are 50,000 civilians on Station Meridian." Daniel made his decision without hesitation. He pressed the button for communication and spoke clearly to every member of his crew. "All hands battle stations. Helm, set intercept course for Station Meridian." Austin Gray was a young man who had dreamed of flying starships since childhood. He sat at the helm of the Fortitude and he looked back at his commander with wide eyes. "Sir, at our maximum speed, we will not reach the station for another 40 minutes. "Then we need to start moving right now, Lieutenant." The Fortitude's engines groaned as they pushed toward full power. Around them, the remnants of the coalition fleet scattered in all directions. Every ship that could run was running. Only the human vessel moved toward the enemy instead of away. Chief Engineer Brooks called from his station deep in the ship. "Commander, I can give you another 12% speed if I bypass the safety systems on the reactor." "Do it. Do whatever you need to do." In the medical bay, Dr. Lisa began preparing for mass casualties. She was a small woman with gentle hands and a calm voice that could soothe the most frightened patient. She had joined the military to help people, and she had never imagined she would see real combat. But as she organized supplies and prepared surgical tools, her hands did not shake. If the Fortitude was going to fight, she would be ready to put the crew back together afterward. On the bridge, Morgan ran calculations on her tactical display. The swarm had noticed them now. A portion of the enemy force broke away from the main group and turned to intercept the slow human ship. She counted roughly 30 vessels, each one larger than the Fortitude. "Commander, enemy contacts will reach us in 15 minutes. Daniel settled into his command chair. His voice was calm. "Good. That is 15 minutes they are not spending on the station." Turned to look at him. "Sir, with respect, 30 of those things just destroyed the entire coalition fleet in 12 minutes. Daniel looked at her and smiled for the first time since the battle had begun. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen. Lieutenant, the Coalition fleet was built for speed. They were designed to hit fast and run faster. The Fortitude was built for something very different. He pressed the weapons activation controls, and across the ship, Massive began to power up. Ammunition feeds clicked into place. Targeting systems came online with soft chimes. All batteries, prepare to fire on my command. Today the galaxy learns what humans are really made of. The swarm vessels approached like a dark cloud against the stars. They had destroyed the finest ships in the Coalition without breaking their advance. They expected the slow human vessel to die just as quickly. They had no idea what they were flying toward. The Fortitude continued on its intercept course. It was not fast, it was not elegant, but it was not running either. 800 humans sat at their stations and waited for the enemy to come within range. In the distance, Station Meridian hung in space like a fragile jewel. 50,000 innocent lives depended on what happened in the next few hours. The slow ship that everyone had mocked was about to become the only thing standing between civilization and destruction. And for the first time in galactic history, the other species would learn why humans built their ships to survive rather than to run. The enemy closed in. The weapons powered up, and Commander Daniel Hayes prepared to show the universe exactly what humanity could endure. The first swarm vessels reached the Fortitude at exactly 1847 station time. They came in fast and aggressive, using the same tactics that had destroyed the Coalition fleet in minutes. The organic creatures fired biological projectiles that slammed into the human ship with tremendous force. Explosions rippled across the hull, and the Fortitude shuddered from the impact. But the ship held. Damage Control Officer Palmer read his displays with careful attention. He was a methodical man who had spent his entire career learning how ships broke and how to keep them together. Hull integrity at 94%, Commander. Armor layers 1 through 3 showing minor damage. Nothing serious. Daniel nodded once. Return fire. The Fortitude's weapons were nothing like the elegant systems used by other species. There were no sleek plasma cannons or sophisticated pulses. Instead, the ship's broadside erupted with kinetic. Massive tungsten slugs, each one weighing several tons, were accelerated to a fraction of light speed by powerful electromagnetic systems. When these slugs hit their targets, they carried the destructive force of small nuclear explosions. The first enemy vessel did not explode or break apart. It simply stopped existing. One moment it was there, and the next moment there was only expanding debris where it had been. Morgan watched her tactical display with growing amazement. The swarm creatures had regenerated from plasma weapons like they were nothing. Energy attacks had splashed harmlessly against their biological hulls, but raw kinetic force was different. The simple physics of mass by velocity squared was something their bodies could not adapt to or heal from. Direct hit on Enemy 2, she reported. Target destroyed. Enemy 3 through 7 are attempting to evade. But the swarm was not stupid. More vessels peeled away from the main group heading toward the station. They recognized that the slow human ship was a threat that needed to be eliminated. Within minutes, the Fortitude was surrounded by more than 100 enemy contacts. All of them poured fire into the human vessel from every direction. The hull groaned under the assault. Alarms began to sound across the ship. In engineering, Brooks fought desperately to keep the reactors stable as power systems fluctuated from the constant impacts. "Commander, we are taking heavy damage on the port side," reported from Damage Control. "Armor layers 4 and 5 are compromised. Internal sections are starting to show stress fractures." "Seal those sections and keep firing," Daniel ordered. The battle became a brutal contest of endurance. The swarm threw themselves at the Fortitude in wave after wave. Each attack left new scars on the ship's battered armor. Biological projectiles punched holes in outer layers. Acidic substances sprayed across the hull and ate into the metal. The ship bled atmosphere from a dozen small breaches. But for every wound the swarm inflicted, the human weapons claimed another dozen of their number. Tungsten slugs tore through organic hulls that had shrugged off plasma fire. Creatures that could regenerate from energy damage could not regenerate from having large portions of their bodies simply removed at relativistic speeds. In the medical bay, Dr. Lisa worked without rest. Injured crew members arrived in a steady stream, hurt by secondary explosions and electrical fires throughout the ship. Her team of 3 nurses and 2 medics moved with practiced efficiency. They treated burns and sealed wounds and kept people alive long enough to get back to their stations. A young ensign was brought in with terrible injuries. Lisa held his hand as he died because there was nothing more she could do for him. Then she wiped her eyes and moved immediately to the next patient. There was no time for grief. Grief would have to wait until the battle was over. On the observation deck of the crippled flagship, survivors watched the distant battle through damaged sensors. The captain had escaped his dying ship in a rescue pod, and now he stared at the display in complete disbelief. The slow human vessel was surrounded by a cloud of enemy ships. Fire poured into it from all sides. Any other vessel in the coalition would have been destroyed in the first minute of such an assault. But the Fortitude was still there, still fighting, still refusing to die. "How is this possible?" the captain whispered. "They should have been destroyed immediately." His first officer floated beside him in the cramped pod. "The humans built something different. They built something we never thought to build." The Fortitude was not meant to win battles through speed or elegance. It was meant to survive. It was meant to take punishment that would kill any other ship and keep fighting anyway. Every system had backups. Every hull section had multiple layers. The ship was designed from the beginning to absorb damage that would be fatal to faster vessels. The battle continued for 3 terrible hours. The Fortitude moved slowly toward Station Meridian, absorbing punishment and dealing death with every meter it traveled. Swarm creatures died by the dozens as they hurled themselves against the human fortress. Brooks called from engineering with exhaustion in his voice. "Commander, Reactor 2 is showing warning signs. I can keep it running, but I need to reduce power to the port weapons array." "Do what you need to do, keep us alive." "That is the plan, sir." After 3 hours, the swarm finally pulled back to regroup. Over 200 of their vessels drifted lifeless in space, torn apart by kinetic fury. The Fortitude floated among the debris, and wounded and leaking atmosphere from multiple breaches. But still intact, still fighting. Daniel looked at the damage reports flooding his screen. The numbers were grim. 47 crew members had died. Another 100 were wounded. Ammunition stores were down to 30%. Hull integrity had dropped to a critical 58%. Behind them, Station Meridian remained untouched. 50,000 civilians were still alive because one slow ship had refused to move. Morgan spoke quietly from her station. "Sir, the swarm is regrouping. Long-range sensors show more of them coming from the outer system, thousands more." Daniel closed his eyes for just a moment. He allowed himself one breath of exhaustion before pushing it aside. Then he opened his eyes and straightened in his command chair. "Then we will need to hold a little longer. Signal Station Meridian and tell them to begin evacuation immediately. We will buy them as much time as we can." "Sir, at our current damage levels, we cannot survive another assault like the last one." Daniel looked at her with steady eyes. "Then we will survive as long as we can, Lieutenant. That is all anyone can ask of us." He pressed the communication button. "All hands, this is the commander. The station is beginning evacuation. Our job is to protect those civilians until they are safely away. I know many of you are tired. I know many of you are hurt. But I also know what this crew is capable of. Today we show the galaxy what humans are made of. Today we hold the line." Across the battered ship, crew members heard his words and found strength they did not know they had. They were afraid and exhausted, and many of them knew they would not survive. But none of them considered giving up. The Fortitude turned to face the direction of the incoming swarm. Its remaining weapons powered up once more, and 800 humans prepared to fight to the last breath for people they had never met. The longest night was about to begin. The evacuation of Station Meridian began at 2200 hours. Civilian transport ships launched in desperate waves, each one racing toward the nearest that would take them to safety. Families crowded into vessels designed for half as many passengers. Children cried while parents tried to stay calm. Everyone moved as fast as they could because everyone knew what was coming. The swarm detected the evacuation immediately. Thousands of organic vessels turned away from their regrouping point and moved to intercept the fleeing transports. They were fast and hungry, and they did not care about the difference between warships and civilian craft. The Fortitude moved to block their path. Commander Daniel Hayes positioned his damaged ship directly between the swarm and the evacuation corridor. What remained of the Fortitude's weapons began firing at any enemy vessel that approached the fleeing civilians. Each shot counted because ammunition was running low. Each kill mattered because every transport that escaped was another 100 lives saved. Admiral Cole received live updates at Earth Command, many light years away. She stood in the operations center with her face showing no emotion as she watched the telemetry from the battle. Officers worked in tense silence around her, calculating odds and trajectories. None of the numbers were good. "Get me a communication line to the Fortitude," she ordered. The connection took several minutes to establish. The signal was degraded by battle damage and the vast distance between Earth and Station Meridian. When Daniel's face finally appeared on the screen, barely recognized him. His uniform was torn and stained with soot. Blood ran down one side of his face from a wound on his forehead. He looked like a man who had been fighting for his life because he had been. Commander Hayes reporting, Admiral. "Daniel, I am looking at your damage reports right now. Your ship cannot take much more punishment." "No, ma'am, it cannot." Felt something catch in her throat. She had sent this man and his crew into a situation that was turning into a death sentence. The evacuation is 30% complete. At the current rate, it will take another 8 hours to get everyone out. "Then we have 8 hours of work ahead of us, Admiral." "Daniel," she paused, searching for the right words. "I am sorry, we should have sent more ships with you." "One ship was enough, Admiral." His voice was calm despite the chaos around him. The Fortitude was built for this exact moment, so was her crew. The communication dissolved into static as another wave of swarm vessels attacked the human ship. Inside the Fortitude, the crew fought on with grim determination. Brooks held engineering together with emergency patches and pure stubbornness. Every time a system failed, he found a way to bring it back online or route around the damage. His hands were burned and his lungs ached from breathing smoke, but he refused to stop working. Morgan coordinated defensive fire patterns even though half her consoles had stopped functioning. She tracked enemy movements on screens that flickered and died and came back to life randomly. Her voice never wavered as she called out targets for the gunners. Martinez worked with sensors that showed him only fragments of the battlefield. He filled in the gaps with guesswork and intuition, somehow managing to give his commander enough information to keep fighting. Austin Gray held the helm controls with steady hands. The ship was sluggish and slow, but he coaxed every bit of maneuverability out of her damaged systems. He positioned the Fortitude to block attack runs on civilian transports, using the ship's bulk as a shield for vessels that could not protect themselves. In the medical bay, Dr. Lisa made impossible choices about who could be saved and who could not. Her supplies were running low. Some wounds were too severe to treat with what she had left. She made decisions that would haunt her for the rest of her life, but she made them quickly because hesitation would cost more lives. At 300, the Fortitude's forward weapons array went completely offline. A direct hit had destroyed the ammunition feed system, and there was no way to repair it during combat. At 400, the port engine failed entirely. The ship's already slow speed dropped even further. At 500, the reactor containment systems began showing critical warnings. Brooks worked frantically to prevent a core breach that would destroy the ship instantly. Daniel ordered all non-essential personnel to the escape pods. Most of them refused to leave. "You need gunners, sir," Morgan said flatly when he told her to go. "I am staying at my post." "Same here, Commander," Austin Gray added from the helm. "Someone has to fly this ship, and I am not leaving her now." One by one, the senior officers made the same choice. They knew the odds. They knew they would probably die. But they stayed anyway because leaving meant giving up on the people they were trying to save. By 600, the evacuation had reached 70% completion. The swarm, frustrated by their inability to break through to the civilian ships, began throwing themselves at the Fortitude in suicidal attacks. They rammed into the hull at full speed, cracking armor and opening new breaches with every impact. Palmer reported from damage control with his voice barely audible over the constant alarms. "Hull breach on Deck 7, Deck 8, Deck 9. Sir, we are losing structural integrity across the entire forward section." Daniel gripped the armrests of his command chair. "Can we still fire our weapons?" "Aye, sir, we can still shoot." "Then we are still in this fight." The forward section of the Fortitude collapsed at 6:23. Explosive decompression ripped through the damaged compartments and claimed 18 more lives. The ship broke into two pieces, with the aft section spinning away from the destroyed forward hull. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut just in time to seal the survivors inside what remained of their vessel. But even now, even broken in half, the Fortitude's remaining weapons continued to fire at the enemy. The swarm pulled back in confusion. By any reasonable measure, the human ship was dead. Its hull was shattered. Its crew was decimated. Most of its systems had failed completely, yet it kept fighting. It kept killing their numbers. It kept refusing to accept that it was destroyed. At 7:12, the last civilian transport cleared to safety. Every single person on Station Meridian had escaped. 50,000 lives had been saved. Daniel received the notification on a screen that flickered badly. He smiled despite the blood on his face and the pain in his broken ribs. "Mission accomplished," he whispered to no one in particular. "We did it. We held the line." The remains of the Fortitude drifted silently among the debris of hundreds of destroyed swarm vessels. The ship would never fly again, but she had done what she was built to do. She had protected the innocent. She had stood firm when running was not an option. And somewhere in the void, the surviving crew members waited for rescue, knowing that their sacrifice had meant something. The swarm from the Meridian system at 7:30 hours. They had lost over 400 vessels to a single human ship, more casualties than they had suffered in any battle in their species' recorded history. The survivors retreated to the outer edges of the system, where they were met by a coalition counterattack that had been organizing during the long evacuation. The reinforcement fleet included ships from every species in the coalition. They had gathered their remaining forces and jumped to Meridian as fast as their engines could carry them. When they arrived, they found the swarm weakened and disorganized from their battle with the Fortitude. The counterattack destroyed the remaining enemy vessels within 3 hours. The threat was ended, but the cost had been terrible. The Fortitude drifted in space as a broken wreck surrounded by debris. Of her original crew of 800, only 112 had survived. They huddled together in the aft section of the destroyed ship, keeping each other warm as life support systems slowly failed. They tended their wounded with the last of their medical supplies. They mourned their dead with quiet tears and whispered prayers. When the rescue ships finally arrived, they found Commander Daniel Hayes unconscious in his command chair. He was still gripping the armrests, his hands locked in place from hours of tension. He had lost consciousness from blood loss sometime after the evacuation was confirmed complete, but he had refused to leave the bridge while his ship was still fighting. Admiral Cole traveled personally to the hospital ship where Daniel was taken. She stood by his bedside as the medics worked to stabilize his injuries. His wounds were severe, but the doctors said he would survive. He would need months of recovery, and he might never fully regain the use of his left arm, but he would live. Looked down at the unconscious commander and made a quiet promise. "The galaxy will remember what you did here, Daniel. I will make certain of it." The aftermath of the Battle of Meridian brought changes that no one had expected. The coalition species had been humbled by their losses. Ships they had considered invincible had been destroyed in minutes. Tactics they had trusted for centuries had proven useless against an enemy that did not fight the way they expected. But the human ship had survived. The slow, ugly vessel that everyone had mocked had held its ground against impossible odds and saved 50,000 lives. They opened their technical archives and invited human engineers to study their systems. In exchange, they wanted to understand how humanity had built something so resilient. The Ali requested formal military exchanges, sending their officers to train with human crews and learn the doctrine that had produced the Fortitude. And across known space, the story of what had happened at Station Meridian spread from world to world. The battle became known simply as the Stand at Meridian. Military analysts studied every aspect of the engagement. They calculated that the Fortitude had absorbed damage that would have destroyed any other vessel in the coalition at least 5 times over. The ship's crew had fought for 11 continuous hours without relief, without reinforcement, without any real hope of survival. They had done it anyway. 6 months after the battle, a memorial ceremony was held at the rebuilt station Meridian. Delegations from every coalition species traveled to attend. The docking bays that had once held mocking alien crews now held ships carrying diplomats and military leaders who came to pay their respects. Admiral Cole gave the main address. Her words were broadcast across more than 100 worlds. "The Fortitude was not our fastest ship," she said to the assembled crowd. "It was not our most advanced. Many of you laughed when you first saw it arrive at this station. I understand why you laughed. The ship did not look impressive." She paused and let her words settle over the audience. "But the Fortitude was built to answer a simple question. How much can humans endure? How long can we hold on when everything says we should give up? The answer, it turns out, is more than anyone expected, more than anyone thought possible." In the audience, the survivors of the Fortitude sat together in a reserved section near the front. Lieutenant Morgan wore the Medal of Honor around her neck, one of 17 such medals awarded to the crew. She had earned it for her actions during the final hours of the battle when she had personally led damage control teams to seal critical breaches. Brooks had retired from active service after the battle. His hands had been too badly burned to work on delicate engine systems anymore. But he was consulting on the design of a new class of dreadnoughts that would incorporate everything learned from the Fortitude's final stand. Dr. Lisa had been promoted to Chief Medical Officer of Earth's main orbital hospital. She had saved more lives during the battle than anyone could accurately count. She still had nightmares about the ones she could not save, but she had learned to live with them. Commander Daniel Hayes sat in a wheelchair at the very front of the reserved section. His injuries were still healing, and the doctors said it would be another year before he could walk without assistance. He did not mind the slow recovery. He had learned the value of patience. Austin Gray sat beside him. The young pilot had changed since the battle. His eyes carried a weight that had not been there before. He had aged years in a single night, but he had also learned what he was capable of when everything was on the line. After the ceremony ended, the ambassador approached Daniel personally. The tall alien had to crouch down to speak with the seated human. His translator rendered his words with unusual emotion. "Commander Hayes, my people wish to apologize for our behavior before the battle. We mocked your ship. We mocked your species. We treated you as inferiors. We were wrong." Daniel considered the ambassador for a long moment. Then he extended his hand in the human gesture of friendship. "Do not apologize," he said. "Build something better instead. Learn from what happened here and create ships that can protect your people the way the Fortitude protected those civilians. That is what we do. That is what humanity has always done. We learn, we adapt, we survive." The ambassador took his hand. Across the galaxy, shipyards began working on new designs. The lessons of the Fortitude were being applied to dozens of new vessels. Humanity's slow and stubborn philosophy of war was spreading to species that had spent believing that speed was everything. And in the military archives of every civilization that had witnessed the stand at Meridian, a new entry was added to their assessment of humanity. "Do not underestimate them. Do not mock them. Do not assume that their apparent limitations are weaknesses. The humans do not build their ships to win battles quickly. They build their ships to survive battles entirely. And survival, in the end, is the only thing that truly matters." The Fortitude was gone forever, broken and scattered across the void near Station Meridian. But her legacy would endure for generations. She had proven that courage and determination could overcome any odds. She had shown that even the slowest ship could be the most dangerous. And she had taught the galaxy that humanity, despite all its apparent weaknesses, was never to be underestimated. The stars continued to burn in the endless darkness of space. New ships launched from human shipyards every day, each one carrying the spirit of the Fortitude in its design. And somewhere among those stars, the next challenge was waiting. Humanity would be ready for it. They always were.